So good morning to our viewers in the United States and good afternoon to those in the United Kingdom. I'm Professor Katie Normington, the Vice-Chancellor and Chief Executive of De Montfort University, Leicester, UK. And I'm really delighted to be doing another of my leadership series here. And the purpose of this series of talks is to hear from a variety of people who hold leadership roles about leadership itself, how different individuals approach leadership, and what makes somebody a successful leader. One of the things that we're really proud of at De Montfort University is that we've been chosen by the United Nations Academic Impact Initiative to be a Sustainable Development Goal Hub for SDG 16, which is peace, justice, and strong institutions. The United Nations SDGs are a set of goals that, if achieved, will improve poverty, equality, and sustainability and other aspects of life across the planet. And we've been using SDGs as the basis for our new Empowering University strategy. And we're working towards developing impacts of all 17 SDGs. So today we're delighted to be at the United Nations headquarters in New York for a unique interview in our series. We've been invited to the UN's SDG studio to interview our special guest, Director, Sustainable Development Unit, Executive Office of the Secretary General at the United Nations, Michelle Gyles-McDonnough. As the lead Sustainable Development Advisor to the Secretary General and Deputy Secretary General in the Executive Office, the Director leads a Sustainable Development team responsible for the formation and implementation of the work of the programme for the delivery of the Secretary General's Sustainable Development Vision and reform of the UN development system. Throughout her career, Ms Gyles-McDonnough has practiced privately as a lawyer, served as advisor to the Secretary General of the Organization of American States, and has deep development experience within UNDP, including as Chief of UNDP's sub-regional facility for the Caribbean, UN Resident Coordinator for Barbados and the OECS, and Resident Coordinator for Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei Darussalam. Ms Gyles-McDonnough holds a law degree from Columbia University School of Law, with honours in international and foreign law, a master's in public administration from the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, and also a diploma in executive education from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. And she received her undergraduate degree at Bryn Mawr College in Pennsylvania. So Ms Gyles-McDonnough, welcome. And first of all, I'd like to start off by asking you, that sounds like such a stellar academic career. Right from the start of your life, were things going well? Was that the sort of career you could see yourself having? What was it like kind of growing up at that point?
Well, thank you. And it's a real pleasure to be here with you, Professor Normington, and with the students from De Montfort University. Before I answer your question, let me just thank you for this opportunity to engage with the Academic Impact Hub at the university. Universities, as we know, play a really crucial role in ensuring that we can achieve these sustainable development goals. And the work that you have already done in terms of integrating the sustainable development goals into the curriculum and then building from that curricular investment into integrating it into the strategic plan across the entire university, I think is remarkable. And we hope many, many more will follow in your footstep. To your question, I'm from a family that has a deep sense of service and a deep sense that with capability, given opportunity, and with hard work and dedication, anything is possible. And so from a family that invested not only in my education, but in the education of many, many, many children less advantaged than I was. And, at the end of the day, that's the core of human development. It is about capabilities, agency, choice, and equality of opportunity. And once you have that opportunity, the responsibility for the hard work, the dedication to use that opportunity to build a future that you want, that contributes to nation building and contributes to a better global family. And so those are my founding values. And I'll tell you a little story. I'm from a small island with big voice, big ideas, and big impact. We have a very open view of the world. And as a young child, Jamaica became the host of the International Seabed Authority. And I went on a tour, and I was very struck by the message from the architect, who explained how important it was to integrate traditional knowledge and culture in the design, the lighting of each room to facilitate negotiations depending on which stage it was, and to ensure that what happened in this space could build consensus for a better world. I never forgot that. And I think that's actually where my inspiration came from, because I left there saying, I want to do this. I didn't remember until my mother reminded me when I was in my 30s, sitting behind a flag at, representing my country. But it left a deep impression because it showed the importance of spaces to really engage in shaping the rules of the game. The rules of the game are really important in terms of offering opportunity, choice, and progress for people and for countries. And so that's where my start came, and somehow everything I've done since has been related in some way to that direction.
And I think it's evident from what you're saying, particularly about the aspect of service there, that I can kind of see the thread that took you through your life to choosing to work with the Sustainable Development Goals. But you set off as a lawyer, so was there a kind of Damascus on the sense of that road to Damascus, and you saw a moment when you thought, actually, law's not for me, I'm doing this, or did the journey weave quite seamlessly?
No, I actually love and miss the practice of law sometimes, but I also chose a specialization that links very directly. I didn't become a litigator. I became a trade lawyer focused on policy, focused on global frameworks, on trade agreements, on setting rules and norms. And so it's a part of the same. So I spent a lot of my time as a trade lawyer working on issues like how to integrate smaller economies into the global economy. How do you make space for islands of the Caribbean, smaller economies in Central America, to be able to benefit from a rapidly advancing globalization and not be left behind? So in a way, it's the same. And it's really, I think my focus has been injecting myself into spaces that allow the framework to shift. And then all of the actors that interact in that space need to find the way to now leverage that frame to get what they need to do.
Yeah, and that makes it sound like there is a kind of fluid way you went through, but presumably in your route to your position now, there were some knocks too, and it didn't go according to plan. And it's one of the things that I'm fascinated about as leaders. It's easy to look at leaders who've been very successful and go, well, it all worked for them, but I can never see myself emulating what they're doing because things haven't gone right for me. So are there any of those knocks that you particularly would like to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they're so much as knocks, but you need to make choices. I think one of the important things to understand is that pathways are not linear and they're not direct. And there are many, many things one balances along the way. Not only the journey you want to travel, but also who comes along with you on that journey and how you share the space with those people on that journey. And so sometimes, it's a bit of a zigzag. You kind of walk sideways, sometimes you stop and you go backwards, and then, but always just staying focused on where you want to get to. And so, there have been moments where I've had to make choices that are compromises. But compromises are important if they bring benefits for a wider whole. Whether those choices are, it's better for my family that I actually not rapidly advance right now, that I pause and have time for my children, have time for my spouse, and then pick it up somewhere else. So sometimes, you feel you miss opportunities, but then it opens other avenues and other pathways that are important.
Great, thank you. So just moving on to your sort of leadership style, the things you've been saying there, it appears that that notion of the space, how you use it and how you work with people in it is kind of a concept that's driving you. I just wonder if you want to say a bit more about the sort of leader you are, but I can kind of get a thread already of some of the things you're talking about what that's probably like.
Yeah. I mean, I would say I appreciate and I try to be an empathetic leader. I think it's really important to put yourself in other people's shoes and then to try to operate from that space or take that into account. I'm very results oriented, so I move at a quick pace, and I really push, and I stay focused on what needs to be done. And you know, I guess maybe transformational in a way. You'll see I spend a lot of time on reforms, on frameworks, on trying to shift directions. And so, yeah, I believe in flat, open, collaborative leadership as well, and to give space for ideas and you know, other views. I am ready and willing to shift direction where you know, they're interesting and you know, can deliver good results for what we're trying to achieve.
Mm. Great. So that ability to sort of shift direction, I guess, is something that must have set you in good stead, because you're dealing with global challenges and they must sometimes seem a bit overwhelming. But also at the moment, particularly in the world over the last 2 years, there have been some really large challenges that I guess have made shifts of direction sort of necessary as well. So I wonder kind of, again, as a leader, how you are working with that sense of the huge global scale that you're operating at.
You know, I think first shifts come from a deep, you know, from active listening. And I think that's really important. And I think when you look at the scale, I mean, this is the United Nations. It's the family of 193. And so we have to find that space for all to thrive, you know, within their own cultural frame and societal frame and aspirations for development, but built around common values that bond us together as a global community. That's not often easy, because sometimes views can be very wide apart and need to come together. And so, I mean, I think collaboration is vital. Inclusion is essential. And I think that sense of openness to new ideas and new thinking, the possibility that maybe you don't have it right and somebody else does, and to really listen actively and deeply to try to find that common ground that is necessary for us all to move forward. It is a time, we know there are huge challenges in the world, challenges to multilateralism. We find a lot of retreat into individual spaces and communities, and but there is the power of humanity and the, you know, that common set of values on which, you know, we've all committed, which I think gives us the energy to move forward and, you know, breathe more new life into multilateralism in a way that is much more open, much more inclusive, much more networked, you know, understanding that the range of actors is large, goes beyond governments, even though this is the home and the town hall of governments, but that we need to engage other communities and other actors in terms of finding what is best for our people and for countries.
Great. And in your sort of leadership journey, you may have had mentors or you may have other people that you look up to, but who has inspired you and taken you where you've got to? Like maybe like more on a local personal level, or it may be, I guess, more global figures as well.
You know, well, I call them angels, and I think it's important to always have silent angels. Some of them don't know they're angels, you know. And I think for me, I wouldn't put up one particular figure. I draw from just a range of leaders across different sectors. I'm deeply observant, and I also very strongly believe that leadership comes from anywhere and everywhere. It's bold and out front. It comes quietly from behind. It comes from the village. It comes from, you know, some really global figure. And so I draw from all of that. I am also, you know, very deeply inspired by everyday heroes, people who just get up and do things every day from where they say, look, I'm Jamaican. I come from get up, stand up. you know. So you just get up and do from where you are, you know, with what contribution you're able to make, and that inspires me.
Yeah, yeah, great. And what have you found most challenging to this point? Has it been a project or a time of work? Or, I mean, you've spoken a little bit about the challenges, I think, of playing motherhood off against careers and things like that. So kind of what's been the greatest challenge for you?
You know, I mean, I think as women, it is important to find that balance, and sometimes it's not easy, but there are ways with support, with community, with family, to be able to make sure you have that, you know, close-knit family that can rely on each other and at the same time pursue your goals. I'm pretty fortunate in that way, in especially, you know, in a job where you travel a lot, you're absent a lot, and how do you anchor family and children in a culture, in a set of values that no matter that degree of mobility, that they're, you know, they're grounded. And so that's one challenge that I play with every day. But I think on the work side, you know, the challenge is to make sure that from whatever vantage point I am in the UN or in, you know, another sector, that, you know, it is positioned at its best to deliver on that mandate that it has. Knowing when and how to pivot, to make sure that the actions that you're taking in the end are the most effective in service of people. And that, you know, that's a journey in the work that we do with the UN, in the work I've done at the country level, and even in supporting the Secretary General and the Deputy Secretary General to shape out these reforms. That process of co-creation, from understanding where there are achievements and then together trying to figure out a pathway that builds on those achievements and then travels towards these goals that we're trying to achieve. You know, it requires humility, and it requires, you know, I think just that real sense of accompaniment. I think respect for what countries have done. I mean, we all have challenges, and that's the beauty of these goals. They're universal, recognizing that, you know, even the most advanced economies are troubled by some very prickly challenges. And so all of us are in a journey of progress. And this is, you know, the Charter commits us to make progress. That's what, you know, deliberately every day. And it can be challenging in that journey because, as I say, just like people, pathways are not linear. You know, politics intervenes, external shock, crisis happens, and sometimes things get walked back, things stall for a little bit, but it's to also accept that as part of a journey and work with countries, with partners to keep moving, you know, towards achievement of these goals, a future that's sustainable and a future that's inclusive.
Great. And what would you see as your greatest impact so far as a leader? The thing you're most proud of?
I'm proud of things that were firsts, and I think important in terms of bringing others into the space. When I worked with the Secretary General of the Organization of American States, it was a time, as I said, really to just see how we integrated smaller economies much more into regional, both into hemispheric and into the global economy. And so the contribution to the analysis, you know, the thinking and the support to smaller economies, you know, as they made their journey is something I'm very proud of. I think also, you know, also at the OAS, the design of, you know, a department on tourism that would focus on sustainable tourism development, and the revival of an Inter-American Congress set up in 1939 that had just kind of fallen off, but to revive that, to think through together as a hemisphere what is effective, sustainable tourism policy for a region that it's a huge contributor to global GDP, but particularly for countries in the hemisphere, Caribbean and Latin America. So that was important, and I think, so from a policy dimension, those things were important. I think the work I do on system change and reform, not just in the US, but also now in the UN. I joined the Secretary General of the US also for reform. And I think here, the Sustainable Development Goals are hugely important to me. I think it calls for action by each and every one of us. We have a responsibility and an obligation as the UN to be as fit for purpose as possible, to accompany countries on this journey toward achievement of those goals, because achievement of those goals improves the quality of life of people, and ensures that they have what I started out with as a child, the fact that it is about opportunity and choice, and the freedom to have that, and the corollary responsibility to use that productively for nation building and for our global common good. So so the reform pieces, the work I did as resident coordinator, which is where rubber hits the road, we're in country with governments, with actors in the national development landscape. The work on, if you're a climate action, climate activist, that early 1.5 degree, the importance, the science, the analytics behind 1.5 degree being the limit we need to put on global warming was, I think, really early push coming out of the Caribbean with Caribbean leaders that I worked with. And I think working with the leaders across the Caribbean to position the climate agenda, and to put early out there this question of loss and damage, still being negotiated, in Glasgow, still on the agenda for the next climate conference in Egypt. But the fact that, for those who didn't cause this crisis and the huge challenge of adaptation, we need a framework to be able to help these countries to adapt. So those are things I'm hugely proud of.
Great. And it's evident there's obviously more to come as well. So, do you have ambitions for the future for what you will achieve as well?
I think, as you've seen from early, sustainable development is my passion. So, I think, for me, it's opportunities to lead and to support achievement of that vision. And I will travel any path that allows me to do that.
Great, thank you. Now you've been speaking, as we've been talking about co-creation, and for us as a university, co-creation with our students is really important as well. So I'm joined as well today by some of our students who've got questions for you. And the first question's from Tamjit, who's a business management and economics student. So Tamjit, do you want to ask Michelle your question?
Good morning. First of all, thank you so much for having us here. It's an honor to be at the United Nations, meet you in person. So my question is, what is the biggest challenge that we must overcome to meet the SDG goals? There are so many. So, yeah, that's my question. We have
to rescue them. This is really, really important. We look around us today. We're facing, crisis after crisis. We had COVID, which had dramatic impacts, not just on health, but on the socioeconomic health of countries. We have a climate emergency on our hands that calls for deep transformation of our economies. And now we have a war in Ukraine with transmission channels that, through, dramatic increases in food and fuel prices, and that are hitting countries at a time when their fiscal space is incredibly narrow and squeezed. So we see some of the SDGs, falling off track. We had made some progress. We were still behind. We had a lot to do, but even some of that progress is being eroded. We have another, 236 million being plunged into poverty, 265 million additional going hungry. This is the wrong direction. And so I think the challenge we have is to stem this decline and get back on track. And then with 8 years left in this decade of action that the Secretary General launched to achieve the goals by 2030, some real urgency in terms of making sure that we do the most we can as individuals, as countries, private sector, civil society, to come together to push and achieve these goals. They're hugely important for humanity.
Yeah.
Thanks
very much. Thanks very much, Tamji. Next, we've got Dennis. Now, Dennis comes from a small island too, but Dennis is a PhD student in traffic management. Go ahead. Thanks.
Thank you so much for having us to share the same sentiments as Tanji. We're young people. I think we look young enough today, right? So as young people, what role can we play to actually beat the SDG targets?
Yes, well, a very important one. I think the first thing is for the world to accept that we have the largest generation of youth in history, 1.8 billion. That's about a quarter of the world's population. The other important piece about this is that 90% of these young people are in developing countries. So they care very deeply about whether they have opportunity and choice, whether their economies can grow, and whether the growth of those economies will allow governments to invest in things that are hugely important to them, their security, education, health, and all these things. So I think, young people are already contributing. They're contributing to resilience, in their communities. They're proposing solutions. They're leading, and I think we have a responsibility to expand that space, and for young people to step into that space, and to help to shape that future that they will carry, not just for them, but for future generations. And so for me, I think you're very effective mobilizers. You're very connected. There's also the most connected generation, but you're not just connected, you're connectors. And by being connectors, you're huge influencers. And the technology makes this even more powerful. And I think with that power to share also comes the responsibility of how that is used. But I think there's huge dynamism. The Secretary General, launched Youth 2030. This was the first strategy to kind of bring all of the arms in the UN system under a coherent approach to making sure that we were not only addressing the needs of youth, we were facilitating the agency of youth, but we were also giving the space for leadership. And for those solutions to come forward. And so anything you all can do to help us lift that youth agenda. We have a really dynamic youth envoy that the Secretary General appointed, who works very hard day to day with young people around the world. She's young herself, and just truly inspiring. And there are many more, including you sitting here. And so, we are there. We have a little bit of experience we can share. And that I think is helpful. And I think, new ideas, you dream big. Big dream is important to leadership and important to vision and execution of vision. And matching that with some active listening and with some experience, I think it's really important that this 25% and the 90% in developing countries, that space is afforded and that space is taken.
Great, thank you. So already from Michelle, I think we're getting a real sense of the way in which her passion comes through, but also her chance as kind of leaders comes through as well. She's brought into her whole way of being, a way of dealing with space, but also a very co-creative sort of space that's been built up, and a way in which the pluralism of contribution is really clear. Everyone's got their place in really addressing this incredibly urgent agenda that we've got. Now, we've also brought with us another couple of students. So over to you, first of all, Kush. I know you're a postgraduate student in international business and entrepreneurship. Thanks very much.
Hello, it's a pleasure to meet you, and thank you for all that you're doing. You're an inspiration to us all. So my question is, with a huge focus on climate change, how do we meet the targets of all the 17 goals?
You know, well, nature and a healthy planet is the source of life. And so I think the responsibility to protect that is important. Sustainable development is about how we meet the needs of all of us living today, but also not limit future generations. And so strong climate action to make sure that we have a healthy planet on which we can all thrive is urgent and important. The other thing is it underpins all of the 17 goals. You can't really separate climate from action to reduce poverty. You can't separate it from health. You can't separate it from the urgent transformation we need in our economies. And so it is actually almost like an underlying force that impacts everything. And so it's vital that we look at the goals in this synergistic, integrative way to allow us to actually reach, the objectives that we have at the end of the day. I don't think you can work on, many of these issues without taking either climate change either hinders the progress we're trying to make on these things, or in the way we address it helps to advance us toward the goals that we're trying to achieve.
Thank you. And finally, we've got Rose, who's a psychology and education student. So Rose, please ask Michelle your question.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, and thank you for the opportunity. And my question is, what would be your key message for current and future leaders and young people in general?
No, thank you, Rose. I think following on the conversation I was just having with Dennis and Tarjit, first and foremost, you're agents and forces of change. And I think that's hugely important. The solutions, the capacities, and the financing to do what we need to do for these goals exist. And so how do we draw on you as effective mobilizers and to help us define pathways towards our objectives is important. I spoke about connected and connectors and what that means in terms of responsibility, but also to invest in your skills and your capacities, which is what you're doing now at De Montfort. And this is incredibly important. I think you have to make the most of what you've been given. I think you need to find, young people, all of us, we need to find our authentic voice. And then I think we need to find the ways for expression of that voice. And I talked earlier about my traveling with the angels. I think you need to take your guardian angels with you. You need to take your cheerleaders silent and loud. And I think, remember also that with every step we stand on the shoulders of someone, somewhere. And that sense of humility in your leadership, I think also helps in terms of, taking us where we want to go. And I think also, especially as young people, to remember that leadership comes from anywhere. It comes from, the community comes from behind. It's not something you claim when you're 40. I think you take it from where you stand at that moment, and with the capacities and skills as you have them at that point, to think about what is your contribution from here, And as you move to a next place, what is my contribution from here? And I think that inspires us to start now, not, thinking that we have to jump over 55 hurdles before, you can step into a space and share your voice and offer what you have as ideas and solutions to problems.
Great. Thank you so much. So we've been really privileged today to be joined by Michelle Gyles-McDonnough, and I think she's given us a real insight into the way in which leadership can take a route. I think her points have been about sometimes that route can be a zigzagging, take you in ways you don't know, but also I think she's been clear about the way in which you can use a framework to deliver your ideas, and particularly when we're talking about the SDGs, these are urgent things that we have to deliver. But I think her vision's very much that one in which everyone can contribute, a real sense that leadership can come from anywhere. It doesn't have to be adopted by people at sort of certain ages or from certain dispositions. So, thank you so much to Michelle for those insightful comments. Thank you to our students for joining us as well today. And I think what we'll be taking back to us to DMU in the UK is a real sense of the passion that's here at the UN and a real sense of urgency in terms of delivering our efforts to enable a planet to be a better place. Thank you.